8 o'clock, we'll call the meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence, and we have apologies from Councillor Sue Oakes, from Councillor Fuller and from Councillor Glenn. Do we accept their various apologies? Yeah. Accepted. Now the next item is the representation of interested parties, and I'll give you a choice. We could do this in one of two ways. You could either say what you want to say to us now, and then in due course we'll come to your planning application. I'm equally happy, bearing in mind that your planning application is number 3 on the list. I don't think that the first two are going to trouble us for very long.
Okay, then I'll wait.
If you want to do it immediately before it comes up, I'm happy to do that.
Oh, that's okay, yeah.
Okay, let's do it that way then. Declarations of interest. Are there any disclosable pecuniary interests? No. No. Any other interests? I suppose I should mention the fact that the lady who is going to talk to us and whose planning application is at number 3 lives in the house that was immediately opposite the house I used to live in for very many years. But I have been gone for about 3.5 years or so from there now. But anyway, so that it's a matter of record. It is over 35 years since I lived in Seymour Place, so I really don't think it's particularly relevant to mention that in relation to our first application. Minutes of the previous meeting. That is the minutes of the meeting that was held on Tuesday the 7th of January. Present at that meeting was myself, Councillor Chesser, Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Sue Oakes and Councillor Neville Oakes. They have been circulated.
Do you want me to propose we accept?
On the basis that there are 2 of you other than myself here, it might be quite handy if somebody proposed it. Councillor Chesser, seconded by Councillor Humphreys. All those in favour, please show. Just bear with me whilst I sign it. That brings us on to the planning applications, the first of which is at 11 Seymour Place, 2-storey extension with wood burner, and external flue to the rear of the house. A number of houses in that area have been extended over the years. They were all built very much in a single kind of style, using all the same material. In other words, they will have Bradstone, etc. I must admit that one of the things I don't know is what it says about materials, because I haven't been able to check. But I'm assuming that the materials that are going to be employed are appropriate, if I can put it this way, to the property. I don't know whether anybody has actually been able to go on the planning site and actually see what materials are going to be used, because it probably does specify it somewhere. It doesn't look to me at first sight as if this is an application, save possibly for that point, which is likely to trouble us particularly. But has anybody got any views?
Well, I think that we've had. Have we got a paper copy of it?
Yeah, they're in order from that way along.
I think in the
I
past.
think they're actually orientated.
You best go.
So you're probably better to go into the middle, if you want to.
Right, okay.
Or alternatively.
Otherwise it means turning them all around.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
I'll tell you what, I know it's a bizarre.
It's easier
Every
to
time
do
we've
it.
As you're coming to explain it, I'll come round as well.
Every time we've done an application for that area, we've always stipulated that it must be in keeping with
Yeah.
the Bradstone and everything else.
don't see anything other than drawings, and we can't really tell very much from the drawing as to what specific materials there are.
Yeah, if that indicates sandstone on corners, both you can see it there.
It does look
Yeah.
like that, doesn't it? And there is an external flue, which does look a bit, obviously, wood.
Roadstone base, existing tiles. I think they're doing it the same.
That plan would indicate.
There's no more information on the site.
No. I mean, the only thing that
They're not
to me
putting
sticks
cladding
out a
on
bit
it.
like this sort of is the external flue, but I'm not sure quite how you get around that. If you were
That's
to
on the
remove
back,
it.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
People,
I would
doing it
object
all
if
the way
it was
around
on,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem.
I think some
with it.
people, certainly people are putting them in, certainly without planning, I should say.
Yes. Right. Well, it seems to me that's most certainly no objection.
Or is it worth putting that as a stipulation? Or already?
Well, it's not an objection, but we will just say that this is on the basis that the materials
Yeah.
materials must be as
On
existing.
building. So-
Item 2 is at the Gascoigne building, I suspect we all know pretty well. It's a tree. Copper Beach undertake more detailed assessment of the tree's stem using a sonic tomograph, whichever one of those is. Sensitively reduce the radial spread of the canopy and its height by up to 2 metres, and if necessary, as informed by a climbing inspection, which that's a bit dodgy, install a cable brace to reduce the risk of failure of branch union of the extended lateral limbs and the main stem. All of which sounds to me pretty much like tree husbandry, and not the sort of thing on which we would ordinarily comment.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I know that for a fact, I maybe should have declared this. I know for a fact that Henry Pearson has been to see that actually, and it is one of the things that the school's looking at to make sure because it's in
Sounds
the
like
public.
orthopaedics to me.
It's in the
Metal braces and-
it is pretty much. I mean, but it's in because it's in a public area.
Yeah.
They're doing it for safety reasons.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously we don't want bits of tree falling on people, so.
And I know there's been an extensive. They've looked at that tree a lot. So it's, this is what they're doing is
It's,
Informed,
belt
as it were.
braces.
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, and it is informed, very much so.
No objection?
no objection.
Do you want to subject to tree officer or not bother with that bit?
I know he's
no
already
objection.
been to see it,
Yeah,
so it's
okay.
been one that he's
Yeah.
auspices.
Looking at it, I can't even see that we'd be saying that because it just looks self-evident. Which brings us to 16 St Peter's Road. 2-storey side and rear extensions with balcony and single-storey garage extension. So easy, you might want to talk to us. At this point.
If I sit here, I can see what you
So
guys
kind of officially we kind of close the meeting at this stage when it's somebody speaking from the floor. So that's
Don't
fine.
worry, it's
Just
okay.
carry on. It's a technicality. You stand, sit, do
We have
whatever.
weird things that we have to do.
Okay, okay. Thank you for letting me speak. I wish to strongly object to the proposed development on 16 St Peter's Road. My feelings are that the plans are not drawn in a way to show the development properly. To an untrained eye, it's very hard to see the extent of the plans and the effect it will have on the neighbouring properties. Number 1, effect on privacy. The balcony on the second floor will overlook our rear garden of number 14, causing an unacceptable loss of privacy to this property. And number 12, the back extension of their own proposal is blocking any view other than into the garden of 14 and 16. And I'd also like further clarification regarding the front balcony as it seems outside the existing building line. So my first point is the balconies and the effect on privacy. My second, now I have got, this is my second point, the effect on levels of daylight. The plans of the proposed dwelling show it extending a double storey to the west elevation which will block out our natural sunlight to the neighbouring property's existing window. Now this is a picture of our bedroom and my husband's done some purple rough lines. I have got some photographs here if that would help. And then the next one, so there's natural light that's going to be lost there. I don't know if you want that to look at. And then that's our kitchen, which will definitely have a huge amount of light lost. Those are the three.
Thank you.
So this is from the second floor, obviously,
Yeah.
and this is where Cameron has worked out where the balcony is going to be, and it goes into. So we're losing it a huge amount. But the kitchen is really where the shadow is going to cause a massive loss of natural light, because all of that will be
So all of that will be
overshadowed.
blocked.
Theirs is the flat roof, so they're converting the flat roof garage into a second
Into the-
two-storey.
yeah, that's-
Yeah, so that's going to have quite a substantial effect on our natural daylight. I know I've only got 2 minutes, so I don't really want to run over.
Don't worry, we are sometimes relatively relaxed about it,
Excellent,
because
okay, that's good.
if things need saying, they need saying,
Oh, that's
so
fine,
just carry
thank
on
you.
and say your piece.
So our concern is it will block out natural sunlight. The increase in roof height is my next point that I'm very concerned about. Again, that will affect our shadowing. I've got notes here, from what I understand, again an untrained eye, that's not that one. The height on the existing is 7.4 and the height on the proposed is 8.3.
Yeah.
I understand, again, from an untrained eye, not. But again, I think we need to clarify, because that is definitely a point that I would query. That's 7.4 and this is 8.3, from what I understand. So there's a considerable increase in roof height according to the proposed drawings, again causing loss of light to neighbouring properties. It seems the proposal is for the height of the dwelling to be 8,300 when the existing is 7,400. And I reference paragraph 1.5 of the planning in East Northamptonshire Council. On 1.5 is to confirm that the roof line should be the same or lower than the original, from what I understand. My fourth concern is, I just want to acknowledge that the written application states that no work has been started. To my knowledge, I can confirm that internal works have been ongoing for a number of weeks. This is therefore a falsification of the application, and I therefore believe the proposal will have to be submitted again, at least. Our point 5 is a discrepancy between the location and site plans and building line. It seems that the proposed line is farther back on the drawings. And as I raised earlier, the front balcony, from what I think might be a balcony, is not in the building line either. They seem to have gone slightly over. And again, I'm not, I'm an untrained eye, but from what I understand, is that it there? So the line that I see here, it's a slight, either the drawing is askew or I'm concerned that there's no extension to the existing building line. And again, the balcony is further outlined when I drew the line across. That is slightly over the line. Now, David and Mrs. Cheshire, I thought I had 2 copies of that, but I possibly have not. Do you mind if I have
No,
that?
absolutely.
So it's just a small query, but I'm concerned that I make sure that I know what's being proposed. Basically, when I drew a line straight across it with a ruler, this is the existing. This balcony does go over the existing.
Yeah.
I can't get my ruler, but
And
my other concern is the back definitely does go across. Again, the slight plans might be skewed a bit, but again, it's a query on the drawings and just making sure we know exactly what we're dealing with. So whether or not it's the layout, I mean, he has got the 13,000 here, but again, I just want to clarify that building lines are actually the front and the back, slightly. That's the existing. And if we square up the paper on the existing,
it's creeping out,
it looks,
probably a couple of feet.
yeah. So again, it's a query on the plan. Now, we feel that the style is inappropriate to other houses on the street. The ostentatious windows are completely out of character to anything else that's on St Peter's Road. And again, the supplementary planning document from Eastern Hants states in paragraph 1.1 and 2 that the design should complement the existing window shapes and respect the amenity of neighbouring properties, which we feel this does not do. My next point, not to rush off, but not to waste your time either. There is an additional bedroom on the proposed design, so it's going from four from 3. So there should be off-street parking for 3 cars side by side. And again, I refer to paragraph 4.4, I think it is, in the Eastern Hants document. And this isn't shown in the drawings that they've allowed for parking for that amount of cars on the driveway. To conclude, on a personal note, we've remodelled our house in 2018 to make the most of the views which we had consent from our neighbours to do. And our plans would have been entirely different if we'd have known that this would have been, going to be intending to be put up and covering that much natural daylight, because it hugely affects the main area that we use as a living area, the side extension. So.
Can I just ask you what the existing material is that the house is built of? I mean, there's a lot of cladding going to be going on. Is it already got cladding? Or cladding?
No.
It's brick, but then there's some dressed tiles. I think it was a fashion house, sort of wood tiles outside, a bit of just on the front.
Okay.
There might be.
Like shingles?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
That's the existing elevations, but they're not, you can't hardly see them, they're not very good at all.
No, again, and to print them out on a printer at home as well, they're pretty useless to...
Right, thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me speak, and shall I leave the pictures with you?
By all means, certainly.
Thank you so much.
Certainly whilst we consider it. Right, well...
Thank you for your time.
Can't help but noticing that the designer of the particular property lives at number 50 St Peter's Road, which is almost directly opposite this property, and indeed was my next door neighbour. So I can say I know something about this particular site and property.
I'll say I'm the neighbour as well.
Join us on the opposite side.
Right.
Yes. Certainly the appearance of this property will look very different
That's what I was
to the other properties in the street, as has been suggested to us. Not so much because it's growing like Topsy, because half the houses in the street have grown like Topsy, including the one that I used to live in, which I was responsible for extending significantly. But those windows are fine on a property of that type, but will look very different to the generally 60s appearance of the rest of the street. So that one stands out to me. I know that when we talk about the impact of loss of light, there are all sorts of issues around that from a planning perspective, but it certainly does appear as if it's going to impact this particular neighbouring property not inconsiderably. And if there is to be a rear balcony area which might lead to overlooking into a garden, it's hardly, on the face of it, particularly desirable. The height, if it is an increase, as much as it appears to be, it's not insignificant. Again, just thinking about the properties in the street, although it's a very sloping road, so that does rather distort things.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, the actual properties on there are pretty much of a type in terms of their height. So if this one was in practice significantly visually higher, again the impact on the street scene is going to be there. And just trying to see if there's anything else I've perhaps failed to pick up. And then of course there's our favourite issue around parking. I suspect, in terms of the fact that it appears that it would retain a garage, there is probably room enough to put a car in the garage and to probably have two more outside it. So I'm not sure that there's necessarily an issue with the parking available on site.
Can I ask you what size the plot is in relation to the house? Because that's the other
I'm just
problem
trying
with
to-
these ones that grow.
I mean, unlike one or two of the properties on the other side, including, and I have to keep harking back to it, but my old house was built on a plot and a half.
Yeah, that's
Which
what
does
I-
make it easier to extend it, because that property was extended and there was still quite a bit of land, as it were, around it. This one, in terms of filling the plot sideways, it's going to look pretty full, if I can put it that way, in terms of the plot itself, and therefore the gap, if you like, between the properties on either side of it will look. So it,
I mean,
it
looking
will
at the
look a bit
plot
crammed
there,
in.
there's hardly any space round.
It will on the, from what we've seen, and this is all we can go on, it will become a very dominant feature on St Peter's Road. Because not only will it impinge and look completely out of character, I think, of the vernacular of that. If there is a slow creep down from the Glepthorne, Cotstock Road end of half, I've noticed on lots of bungalows at the top end of St Peter's recently, that there are a lot, the cladding brigade has started to creep slowly downhill, but they haven't been taking the roof heights higher. They're just, the cladding thing is something that's a fashion, I suppose. But not only the height of this building, the size of it will dominate, and it will look over into the gardens of that corner of Bellamy Road, in fact, I think. It will almost impinge on that as you come down Bellamy Road on the left-hand
You
side.
can see it in one
Yes.
Before you go around the sharp bend of that, because it will be on
Yes, it will
those.
be on, as you say, as you go down Bellamy Road and then go around
Before
that
you hit
corner,
90
it
degrees.
probably would.
That one there, isn't it? Is
Yeah,
that
it
one
will
about-
almost overlook into their garden as well. You know, you'll be able to certainly be able to see it from Bellamy Road. It'll become a feature of the street. And I agree with you. I think there's something odd about it changes the vernacular of that whole area completely. And I think that we're in danger of setting some sort of precedent, I think, with this.
Yeah.
If it's allowed to go forward in its present state. Because the window is completely out of keeping with everything else in the area. Totally. And I know, I mean, you've lived there long enough to know that lots of those houses there were sort of architect designed and built houses, weren't they, on the plots? They sold the plots, and then each house has a tendency to be slightly individual.
Yeah.
You know, because they were all designed to be in individual houses, and there are some peculiar houses around there from that period. But whether we allow that to continue, I don't know.
Right.
So it doesn't give the dimensions of the balcony, does it? Just says balcony.
Yes.
Could be this wide or...
It's difficult to tell, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it could be
Well, when we
substantial.
went back to Lisa, that's If you go back, there was a drawing up there of the site view that showed the size of the balcony.
Site plan.
That's the one, and you can sort of pretty much see, I think, how much the balcony is going to be there.
Yeah, just there.
Hmm.
Or is it that big?
Is that 2 balconies then? Or
Looks like it, doesn't it?
it looks
It
like
does
2
a bit,
balconies
yeah.
to me, but
Does it show you on there? I think that's the wrong one.
Can I show you this? This might be what you might understand.
Yeah.
Yes,
You can
yeah.
see on the rear elevation is definitely a balcony, but I can't
This
see.
could be this 1.5. Is that?
Yeah, that's the balcony, yeah. That's
That
the
is.
one.
is that one?
But again, sitting out here, you're not going to see much of anything but your own garden and my garden. It's a bit of an odd place to have a balcony, really. You can just see the side of your house. It doesn't, I guess,
Oh, that's substantial if you look at the proportion of the room.
It's
It's like another room.
yeah.
Well, it is,
Well, I
isn't
mean,
I like balconies,
That's-
but you know,
it's a third the size of that room
yeah, yeah.
in terms of the actual measurement. Exactly a third of the size.
My query is, what are they going to see? Because the views, the house is in the way of their view. So they're just...
I mean, it's just a straight back view. That's all it can be. More or less.
Sorry.
Yep, okay.
I'm not hearing a great deal of kind of support for this.
You won't get it.
Well, it's difficult to know. You can't sort of obstruct progress, and this is happening all over around. As the houses are getting larger, people are getting, having larger and larger houses built. But when they, from my mind, when they become obstructive or start to change the nature,
Dominate the
dominate.
street scene.
the street scene, because this house will dominate the whole St. Peter's.
And all the cladding and stuff's going to actually emphasise that.
And it changed the
More
nature.
domineering, isn't
It
it?
changed because it's all clad, it's clad and they are anthracite window frames, as it states here. Anthracite colour, it actually changes it from a 60s estate, I suppose, to a...
I mean, it's a
Which is
2000s
another
property right in the middle of all this 60s type development. Right, so I think the answer is yes, we do object to it. We will object to it in terms of its impact upon the street scene, the adverse impact on one or more neighbouring properties. I think we will refer to the height. And we'll make some specific references to the windows, cladding, etc., as part of our rationale for saying that it's an adverse impact upon the street scene. Is there anything else that we would need to add? I'll write you up something for it.
I think that's about it. I mean, it is progress, but not.
Yeah.
Not.
It might be a really nice house in the right location,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
that's probably not it. And I suspect, for what it's worth, had I been living where I was living, and had I not been sitting in this chair, I would have probably been sat over there objecting to this application. I suspect. Right. I don't know if there's any more. Do you want any of those back, or...?
If you're not going to use them, I mean,
No, I mean, once we've used them, we've
to
used
go around
them.
the rest of the neighbours so we can get something to the council.
That's quite important. So you've got
We're going to be...
You've got the general feeling, haven't you?
I've got it. Thank you very much. I've got quite a lot of support on the street as well, so we're
Have
just going to
you?
get everybody to get their objections in. So, but I really appreciate your time this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right. This is a sense of deja vu about the next one. It's 15 Mill Road again. Not only is it 15 Mill Road again, it's the same tree.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. You will recall
It's a rare tree.
this bizarre scenario that there was an application to remove the tree, which was countered by an application by the local authority for a tree preservation order,
Yeah.
which now seems to have led to an application which on the face of it seems to be supported, as far as I can understand it, by the tree officer, to remove this particular tree because of its proximity to a building and to replace it, but not on a like-for-like basis.
Yeah, with the flowering cherry type.
Yeah.
job.
Now, the difficulty I have with this is that if the tree is worth preserving because of the nature of the tree, it's worth preserving because of the
tree.
nature of the tree. And unless there is a compelling reason to remove it because of it causing damage to one or more other buildings, personally, I would want to object.
I agree. It's almost we don't need to discuss it. I mean, in the
It
same
seems to be in line with what we were saying before.
It does seem very.
And I am not convinced by simply replacing it on a non-like-for-like basis that that's good enough.
I don't think it is. They're
Okay.
not planning to put are they planning to put the replacement tree in the hole of the one that they're getting rid of?
It's not entirely clear to me, but I think it will be further away from the building which
If you
they're
look on the
concerned
thing,
about.
it's got the arrows, there's a map.
It's like we get 2 for 1, but that doesn't seem to be the point.
They're putting them near the road, away from the building.
That's TRT1, and there's these two here.
I don't think that's it. That's nothing like in scale, that drawing. But this property is huge, the Wagon and Horses. It comes all the way along to the end. There's hardly a gap between the, because I know, I looked at it the other night. I was going in the
It just seems a way that they've tried to sort of skirt around the original argument.
Right, well I think the answer is we object unless the tree officer takes the view that there is no alternative but to remove the tree. And we don't consider the replacement of it by the 2 other trees proposed of itself is adequate.
Yeah.
I think that's probably it.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that over.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
no,
you for that one.
I don't quite understand it, because if, as you say, it's out of scale, and
Yeah.
it's almost like, oh, as long as we do 2 for 1, because we've had this argument given to us before, haven't we? Where we'll take one out and give, what it was like the 12, we'll take the whole forest out and give you 12 trees back somewhere
Else in the town completely. Yes.
You know, it's like, as long as we plant some more, which I'm all for, I suppose,
Yeah.
in some respects, but even so.
Okay, we'll move on. Now, the next application for 53B West Street is a listed building application. Replacing the front door with like-for-like, this is unlikely to cause us any particular grief, and repairing the frame, similarly, painting it black, probably not an issue.
That's where it is.
Place freestanding bike storage unit on frontage between the front of the house and the railings. Replace wall lanterns with period appropriate when they can be sourced.
Yeah. Please, fly.
What's the front door, if you can see it?
I mean, I have no issue with what they're planning to do with the door, the frame, and can you just go back to that picture again, actually, if it's possible? can't remember now, I don't know, you can't see it on there. You can't see the wall lanterns that they refer to.
You can on the pictures, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's better on there. Yeah, you get a,
Oh,
you get a proper view.
Yes, it's
Now-
cut off on the other
Yes,
one.
Would it-
probably see
Thank
that a
you.
bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. you see
I
that's-
don't think there's a problem with the like for like, is there?
No, I mean, as I say, I don't see any issues for us about the door, the frame or anything else.
Well, that one actually gives you another of the where the little box will go, and that shows one of the lanterns as well. So there's the lanterns. Presumably this box is going along this.
I mean, whether it is possible to say, in planning terms, look, we don't object to the idea of replacing the wall lanterns with period-appropriate ones when you can. What we don't necessarily want is you to take them off what's there currently, unless and until you can replace them in something period,
Doesn't make
because
sense, does it?
they're part of the way it is at the moment, and therefore to remove them completely. Because you know what will happen, they'll remove them completely, and then conveniently they won't source any replacement ones, and they'll be gone forever.
Yeah.
So I'd rather they stayed, and I get the impression everybody else is.
Well, because
cycle-
as it's listed,
Yeah,
there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because that's the look it had when it was listed, presumably.
one assumes so.
Otherwise,
So yeah, I think that's not difficult. Then the insertion of freestanding bike shelter. And what it says on here is there is no space internally for bike storage. My job as a peripatetic tutor requires me to travel around Oundle, taking 3 or 4 trips most days to support my tutees, go to a local gym most days, like to do the journey by bike. And then it talks about the front of the property is an enclosed courtyard, 8 metres wide, 3 metres in depth, boundary with the road made up of black railings. I intend to insert one of the following bike storage units into the space and obscure the unit from the road using honeysuckle or a similar creeper on the railings. The bike shelter will have the additional advantage of obscuring the bins.
I mean, it's not like it's going to be forever there, is it?
Which?
The bicycle shelter or the bins. It's not like altering the building.
No. I must
As long
admit,
as he does it sympathetically and hides it.
You're obviously slightly more sympathetic to that than I am. I mean, I think I am less than convinced in a sense. I mean, I can see exactly why he wants to do it, but it is out of keeping with a listed building. Growing things on the railings will impact visually on what we've got currently, which is, if you like, open railings. Yes, it may obscure the bins, and I suppose that's a potential positive, but I'm not keen. But if others...
Well, I'm willing to be swayed.
Don't be swayed just because I say so,
I
but...
think that the bike shed, perhaps an obscured bike shelter, as long as it is something like that, not some sort of another building that's going to be put up there, is probably better than the bins ananyway.
Yes.
The bins themselves are unsightly.
Yes, that's what I
You
was
know, they're
thinking,
just-
you see, that
you
it
know,
might tidy up the whole job.
Yeah, it might, and it seems to be from his application, or whoever has written that, is that he wants to do it sympathetically.
Yeah.
He's not taking the piss.
No,
He's
No,
actually
no, I
trying
mean,
to do it and and make a reasonable job of it by saying, well, I'll compensate by planting honeysuckle or
yeah,
something
yeah.
around it.
It's probably not
I
something
mean,
you'd have to have.
I might agree with you, David, on the thing of perhaps not let it grow on the railings, let it grow over the shed.
Yes, yeah.
And make it go that way rather
Yes,
than the other.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can't stop him from storing his bikes, can you?
I suppose
And
the
his
short
benches.
answer is you probably can,
I mean,
because you're not supposed to do certain things
But
with
I look
listed
at some
buildings.
towns where they've got probably 4, my son's got 4 bins where he lives in London.
I think bins
Yes.
are far more objectionable
far
than
more
anything else.
objectionable.
But I certainly agree with you about the lanterns. I think that's
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
significant.
All right, so
Yeah,
we're agreed about most of it. On that one, would agree to differ, but there are 2 of you and 1 of me. So I think what we'll simply say in relation to that is that there is no objection, subject to the view of the conservation officer. However, we might put that we have some concerns about the idea of growing things on the railings, and we'd rather that this was concealed in a way that didn't involve an impact on the railings.
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can
Because there's
see.
the bins look, I mean that looks a mess.
Yeah, it's a real
You
mess
can't
there
help
anyway.
it.
But there's
Yeah.
that little picture there, although that's not the house. There's a container next to that shelter. Now he could put a large flower pot and have it grow over the shelter rather than the railing. So it's,
Okay. 19 Herne Road. Erection of a single-storey timber granny annex for ancillary use to the main dwelling.
So is this a granny shed?
Well, it appears to be a granny shed, yes. I mean, let's have a look and see
The only
if
one
we
you
can
really need to
see
see, to
it.
be
Yeah.
fair.
Oh, that's what it looks like.
that looks like a house. This is a remarkable, another sort of trick now, I think.
Yeah.
Yes,
Let's call it a granny annex, and in fact, you could get a family to live in that, couldn't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Which granny will be.
It's 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen.
yeah. I mean, it's...
Although you can't see it from the road, can you? You can't. There's nothing. You can't see.
No.
You won't be able to
That's
see it
the
at all.
property.
In fact, it would have absolutely no impact on the street scene whatsoever.
I can't really see any reason in planning terms to object to it. I can't say I particularly like it, but on the other hand, it's functional and you can't really see any particularly deleterious effects of it.
Unless Granny's got 2 cars, of course, because her road's already bad enough.
Well, yes. I suppose there is.
There is another
that.
house that's done that,
Have they?
down Herne
Oh,
Road.
right, okay.
But looking at the property, there's enough space on there, even providing space for an occupant and a visitor. There's probably enough parking on site.
Yeah. No, there's
That
I think
displays
those houses. I can't remember how far down that is. You know
It's
better
not
than me.
retrospective, is it?
No,
No,
they are large plots.
yeah. I mean, there isn't a, or at least there isn't a site plan that puts it in context exactly how far down it is, and I'm struggling a bit to work out exactly where it is. It would be.
It's between the 2
It
pathways.
must be about halfway down towards the school.
Yeah.
I thought.
What's going on? I don't know why it's doing this now. The other one doesn't show you any more detail. That's the best one.
Yeah.
The other one just shows you the bits on the right
Well, I
hand side.
don't believe it's big enough gardens.
Yeah.
All right, no objection.
Yeah.
Some amended plans in relation to 89 South Road. This is the point at which.
Is this the one we had the presentation for?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to remember when we last looked at 89 South Road, because I've taken
Wasn't it
take the precaution of bringing with me the minutes for this council year. And I'm just trying to see if I can see when we looked at 89 South Road. Right, yes, it was indeed last time,
Yeah.
Yeah.
7th of January, and we objected to that application, saying the size of the proposed replacement dwelling and its location on the site is such that it would have an adverse impact upon the neighbouring property,
Yeah.
number 87, and is out of scale with other residential properties on that side of the road. And as Councillor Humphreys reminded us, that was the one where we had
Yeah.
presentations going on from objectors. So some amended plans have come in. Now, I don't know how clear it is from amended plans, but
I've printed the 4 main ones off. You're probably best to look at them on there, actually.
I'm going to have a quick look down there.
They have made a
Substantial, yeah.
substantial reduction in this house.
1 storey. Half of the building's now just 1 storey.
That's the original huge house that we objected to,
Right.
and this is the amended house, which is substantially
one of the objections was that they'd
Was
been
it was
overlooking the
a double
gardens.
house, wasn't
Yeah.
it? This bit was
Yeah.
the objection, and now they got rid of that completely.
Yeah.
It does, I have to say, seem to me to meet probably all of our objections.
Well, it's a huge difference.
It is a
It's
substantially
not going to be overlooking their
The
gardens.
street
which
scene
is-
is no different, but they've taken away the garden objections.
Yeah,
which was the primary.
yeah,
So sort of we have a moral victory.
we have indeed,
It looks like people have listened, doesn't it?
yeah.
And I've not had any correspondence from the
No,
two people that objected. They're
Kind of
obviously not here.
suggests that the people who were so
They're happy.
exasperated by the original plan are no longer feeling the same way. Now, okay, I don't know for sure that that's right, but certainly no obvious noises being made.
But it just shows how useful it is to have proper representation and how useful it is to have the architect here to be
Absolutely.
because
He's
when Paul was here and you could see what we were, what the objections
Yeah,
were, and
yeah.
he's
He's
a
obviously gone away
when we've done
and
it.
used something else.
Well, we're more likely to give him council work. He likes working for the council.
I mean, yeah, great. I mean, he's a local. He understands.
Yeah.
Doesn't he? I think he understands a lot of what we're talking about.
And that again is more sympathetic to the vernacular of that end of
Well,
South
because
Road.
there's what that end is going to become
Yes.
has it already become because of that first one they built, and this is what
Yeah.
3 doors away from it, or something. So it's yeah.
I've no objection
Yeah,
to,
no
the,
objection.
to the new plans, so that's good. Wasn't it always wondering about and looking at paper plans? It doesn't help take you back. However, it's extremely useful, so thank you. Right, so no objection to that one. 14 North Street, listed building consent, internal works to include the removal of multiple nib walls. You know what a nib wall is?
What's a nib?
I don't know. To enable reconfiguration of the existing kitchen layout at first floor, the current WC will be knocked through to the bathroom to create a large family bathroom. Unless anybody is familiar with the inside of 14 North Street, which as far as I know I'm not. And if I have been, I haven't registered it.
Is it very difficult to see? I don't know whether you'll be even able to see it.
Nib might be mud. I mean, they may be preserved.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that if ever there was a response that says, actually, what we would really like to know is whether or not the conservation officer has a problem with what is proposed, because it could well be that what they want to take out is one of the primary features of the building and why it is listed, but I don't feel competent.
Which side of North Street
to
is
say.
this house? Do we know?
No, there's the
14 North
plan,
Street.
look.
Have we got a location plan?
Yeah, there.
Okay.
Where is it?
So up
Is
from
that on the corner?
the corner of Duck Lane.
Oh, yes,
That lane?
yes, there it is, right up in there. Yeah, so it's, yeah, that's not a property I think I've ever been in.
Is it a label grade 1?
No, I think it's a grade 2 listed.
And at grade 1 you wouldn't be able to dig around, but you're
But
absolutely
It'd be
right.
even more difficult to get
Yeah.
consent for anything.
I would suspect they're wanting to take walls down that they shouldn't be.
Yes, but I mean, if that's the case, Lloyd will just say no. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
so I think we'll simply say,
Look at them.
We could say that we will reinforce or anything proposal by the conservation officer or something.
so it's something along the lines of if the conservation officer considers the proposed works adversely impact, we would object. Because it is that, isn't it? We would object if he objects, essentially.
I mean, was it on that map? There was. I know it doesn't apply directly to this, but we did have a guy who lived at 16 Duck Lane, didn't we? Didn't he come and give a presentation about the noise early morning? He wanted to reduce the speed.
He lives down
limit,
Duck
didn't
Lane,
he?
doesn't
He lived
he,
down that
somewhere
lane.
around
Yes.
that?
Next door.
He
to
did.
this
It
one.
was
16, I think.
It was, yes, he certainly lived somewhere down Duck Lane,
Yeah.
but not immediately on the...
Not
It's further
quite,
down it,
that's
as
right,
it were.
yeah.
Not that it
I
goes
mean,
very
it was
far.
not a sensible request,
Hmm.
because when North Street was two-way, you couldn't move,
Quite.
which is why it was made
Which
one
is why it
way.
is what it is.
Yeah, no,
Anyway, I
just
think
curious.
we
Yeah.
digress
Yeah,
slightly.
absolutely.
So, I'll put it in those terms, that if the conservation officer is not happy with the proposed internal works, then we would wish to object, but otherwise we wouldn't.
Yeah,
Because we'd no better
I mean,
clue.
because it says multiple nib walls,
Yes,
you see. that
the
was-
use of the word multiple slightly worries me, but I just don't feel competent
Yeah,
to.
it more than
So,
slightly worrying.
Right. Now, I think that in practical terms, the next two are really more for information purposes than they are for decision purposes. 20 New Road is one of those ones where, in essence, I think it's more like a deemed consent. I think there are certain bases in which the local authority could leap up and down, but not many. And this simply is a flat roof rear extension with a lantern to extend 4 metres beyond the rear wall of the original dwelling, maximum height, etc., etc. And as it says, hopefully on there, for information only. So, you know, we've been advised of it, but it's not a matter in essence for us. And the other one, 44 East Road, discharge of conditions pursuant to planning application number whatever, from the 4th of November, garden storage shed, main door moved, and new open porch, front elevation rendered, addition of 2 small side windows and relocate, 1, new conservation roof and windows, new dormer roof to rear elevation, condition 2 materials, and again it's really just for our information, so it doesn't require any kind of decision by us. So that seems to have taken us through the planning applications themselves. The remaining items on the agenda deal with planning outcomes, and there's only 2 or 3 actually on there. And so there's nothing very much to say in relation to those. Planning appeals, there are none. Which brings us simply on to any other relevant matters for report. Councillor Humphreys, do you have
No.
anything for us?
No.
Councillor Jessup. The only thing that it's not a matter for report, but I do feel that somewhere we probably ought to record in our minutes the thanks of the committee for all the efforts made by former Councillor Neville Oakes for the presentations and things he put together for us. He did an enormous amount of work, and we will miss that.
Yeah.
It would be terrific if we could get somebody else who would be willing and able to do something not dissimilar.
We've got to get more people on this committee anyway.
Well, certainly tonight is a bit worrying. One more of us absent, and we could not have had a meeting.
Exactly.
And that's a bit too tight. Now, okay, we'll no doubt be mentioning at full council the fact that we've had a resignation which impacts upon this committee, and seeing if one of our existing councillors is willing to come on.
Who's that?
No, I said if somebody's
if,
willing
if.
to. I'm not aware of anybody. If somebody's willing to come on, fine. If not, well, I suppose thinking about it realistically, we've got March and we've got April, and then we've got some elections. Who knows where we're going to be at the end of that lot. And that's it, really. Can I also thank Lisa, because she's managed to,
Yeah,
I
well
suspect,
done.
relatively short notice, to put things on the screen for us and produce all of this,
Perfect.
which has enabled us to
Amazing.
function pretty much as we
Well,
normally
I
do.
actually have to say I prefer it.
Well, I know
I think
Have
you've
we-
done so well.
shall we turn
You've
off the-
probably